Swarming is not automation. Swarming is not switching the one operator between many drones. Swarming is true self-collaboration and self-communication by drones. So they work together to achieve the goals that humans set. Or another drone set probably in some future. And this is what swarming is for us, how we define it. Not about like, you do this, you do this, you do this, you do this, you have 5 minutes. That's not swarming, that's just micromanagement.
Welcome to The Vertical Space, the podcast at the intersection of technology and flight, featuring deep dives with innovators, early adopters, and industry leaders. We are your hosts, Jim Barry from Celerity 05 and Peter Shannon and Luka Tomjanovich from Radius Capital. At Celerity 05, we believe that breakthrough air transportation capabilities come from leveraging current and emerging technologies, and that companies achieve profitability through relevant technologies, strong teams, and a deep understanding of the aviation market. Connect with global aviation experts at celerity05.com for feedback and recommendations to chart your path to success. At Radius Capital, we invest in early-stage deep tech that redefines what is possible in aerospace. We partner with founders building next-generation aerospace capabilities, from advanced design and development tools to the digital transformation of the flight environment, novel use cases and forms of flight, and the software and systems that make them possible. If this describes you, reach out. We're excited to connect. All right, let's dive in. Drone swarming is one of those buzzwords we've all heard, especially in the context of the war in Ukraine. But despite the hype, it remains a hard problem, and for good reason. Making drones communicate and collaborate to achieve a tactical effect, particularly in environments without GPS and with heavy jamming, requires some serious engineering. And today we're joined by someone who's deep in this fight, Serhii Kupriienko, founder and CEO of Swarmer, a cutting-edge defense tech startup building autonomous drone swarm capabilities. In this conversation, we explore how drones have evolved over more than 3 years of full-scale war in Ukraine, from early improvisations to the growing maturity of FPV drones and the complex tech stacks that now power them. We get into GNSS-denied navigation, automated terminal guidance, and how even today many of these technologies remain brittle or half-baked in practice. Naturally, we spend much of the episode on swarming, what it is, what people get wrong about it, and why it's not just about flying in formation or controlling multiple drones from a single operator. Instead, swarming is a behavior. It's about groups of drones autonomously coordinating and adapting to achieve a shared mission objective. We also talk about Ukraine's unique innovation dynamic, rapid, necessity-driven invention on one hand, and on the other, a battlefield environment that often favors familiar tools over unproven ones, no matter how advanced. Finally, we discuss the biggest hurdles to developing and deploying swarming systems, the future of counter-UAS technology, and where the Ukrainian startup ecosystem goes from here. A bit more about Serhii. Before founding Swarmer, he led AI efforts at Ring, the smart home security company acquired by Amazon. He's a Stanford alum and also studied the ethics of AI at the London School of Economics. Today, he brings that rare mix of Silicon Valley engineering and thoughtful systems design to one of the most difficult and urgent problems in defense tech. Enjoy the conversation with Serhii after a brief sponsor message. This episode of the Vertical Space podcast is brought to you by UAvionics. UAvionics is the leader in low size, weight, and power certified avionics for manned, unmanned, and advanced air mobility aircraft. Let UAvionics help you achieve your goals, whether that be type certification, airspace access, or beyond visual line of sight operations. UAvionics has certified and certifiable communications, navigation, and surveillance avionics for your aircraft. So head over to uavionics.com or Google it to see how you can start flying safer and move your platform forward into shared airspace. Well, Serhii Kupriienko, welcome to the Vertical Space.
Oh, thank you for hosting me. Pleasure to be here with you guys.
We're looking forward to this conversation. And we normally ask the first question if there is anything that very few in the industry agree with you on.
Yeah, I'd say this is a very good question. And the point is, swarming is not about flying informations, like literally. Because it was my very big surprise when you were saying, okay, swarming is about efficient management of different assets. But when you show up into the generals and to the industry primes, they say, what kind of formations do you fly in? We say, we don't. Like, no, this is swarm, you should. And end of the day, I just gave up and say to my R&D team, guys, can you please implement some formations, because I just don't want to explain that anymore. Okay, formations. But this is one of the biggest things.
So in other words, you're saying swarming doesn't necessarily mean the proximity of one drone to another, but it is about how they are deployed in a collaborative fashion to achieve a certain effect.
Absolutely. Kind of where did it all came from is because birds fly in swarm, like insects fly in swarm, but that's because they use visual connection to each other, and this is how they perceive and send the signals to each other with wings, with the body position. For drones, that's not the point. And the second point is when you have many assets in the same area, you have the small interval and high readiness of these assets when you want to have like 5 different strikes in a row. But again, this is not necessarily swarm. You can distribute it across the area from different sides. It always should be defined by the, if you're talking here in defense, by the enemy systems, by the location, by the environment, but not just we have a square-shaped swarm and we'll win everything. That's a different story.
And do people have a misconception about the size of the swarms that we're talking about? I mean, lots of people have seen drone light shows and the like, and are they incorrectly transferring that sort of mental picture over to what we're talking about here?
Yes, like that. So if like at Swarmer, if you're a successful company, you should present something with the sky like completely dark out of the drones. No, it's not. And thanks for the question about the birds. I think one of the key differences we bring here is we're building the system by first principles, how it should be done for computers, not mimicking humans. And Swarm is somewhere from the nature when if we try to build the group behavior, we don't have to try and mimic nature here, because computers are way more efficient in different ways, and we should follow the strength of the computers and of the communication systems we have there.
Another misconception that I commonly hear with regards to swarming is that people tend to forget that swarming is a behavior and not a type of flying, right? Which kind of ties back to your observation. And I am a little bit surprised because especially people who are in the armed services in the Air Force, they should know by observing the evolution of formation flying that initially, aircraft started flying really close to each other because that was the only way to support each other. And it was always about visually checking the 6 o'clock of your lead and mutual support. But you look at the 5th generation, 4th generation fighter aircraft today, those formations are so-called sensor formations. They are staying in formation to the point where they can have situational awareness by means of sensors. They're not necessarily close to each other the way that aircraft work in the early days of aviation, or even World War II, or hell, even later in conflicts. And so, yeah, it's surprising how people jump to that conclusion that formation flying and / swarm implementation in drones necessarily implies flying close to each other.
I think that makes perfect sense, and the very root reason is, look, you have to be engaged in aviation somehow and in military aviation to know this. And who are the people on the front line and in the armed forces who work with drones right now? They're just infantry forces, intelligence service, special service, like everyone except aviation guys. So they have totally different experience, totally different perspective. They have a different even understanding of network-centric warfare, because for them that's different.
I'm also assuming, given we're going to stay on the name Swarmer, you're dealing with the greatest fear
Absolutely.
of swarms.
Even 2 of them, yeah.
So I would assume, I love the name of the company, but I assume you're first dealing with the military's greatest fear before you actually explain to them what you do as a company.
So when I try to explain swarming to the people who are not in, I use the very, very simple sentence every single time. The swarming, this is not when you have 5 drones flying in the same direction. Basically, this is called automation. This is when you have 5 drones incoming, you shoot first, and the rest immediately regroup and strike you from every single other side. So this is what makes it so exciting and so scary at the same time. And this is so true. And I constantly get asked by, okay, will it work? Yes. Can we stop it? Yes. How should we do it? This is the big red button. Okay, may I press it? Yes, please do. Will it work? Yes. And because, this is AI, and this is some like crazy, unclear, harder to understand AI, and on the one hand, and on the other hand, especially when we work in Ukraine, for the last 3 years, Army developed a lot of practices, and basically they get used to the assets they have. That is a very simple human-controlled drones. So as soon as you try to add a piece of automation or autonomy, it's totally different approach, because now it's not a soldier with a remote control from 2 kilos of explosive that's flying above your head. That's some crazy self-driven 2 kilos of explosive flying above your head. And that makes a lot of things different.
Well, we'll get to that. But how about we start with walk us through the arc of how drones have evolved in Ukraine since 2022. And at a high level, I will try to summarize the first year of the war as the war of, the basic Mavic ISR drone. The second year was about FPV drones. And then the third year, perhaps about air interceptors and some more advanced tactical use. Would you agree with that, high level arc? And give us a bit more detail of how you've seen it from your perspective and how this arc continues to evolve.
And Luca, I think it's important to also inject the scaling that took place over those years, not just the evolution of use cases, but there was obviously tremendous scaling and bottlenecks were encountered. And I think that this story fits into that as well.
Yeah, the first drones in Ukraine was applied in 2014 and 2015, like the very early companies, and the DJI started to emerge then. But I'd say it's pretty similar to the development of the piloted manned aviation during the Second World War and just before that. So, and what drives me kind of crazy here is we tried as an industry a lot to bring way more automation, way more kind of autonomy to the drone, but 99% of them are still remotely controlled toys and require from 1 to 5 pilots depending on the class size, and just to manage them, just to get them airborne and to control them. But what changed dramatically, it's not a garage-made drone anymore. That's highly industrialized assembly and manufacturing lines for the small ones, even for the big ones, like companies like Aerologics have, or Skyfall, for instance, they have decent manufacturing capabilities, and they do thousands of drones. And this highly automated manufacturing. Other than that, in terms of the technologies, we developed a lot of things, again, in terms of material design, in terms of assembly lines, etc., etc. But in terms of the underlying technology, it's still the same open source, mostly open source or Chinese source flight controller software. And the development arc is close to the aviation. It's small drones, the bigger ones, the counter-UAV systems, the faster ones to avoid counter-UAV, and drone carriers that deliver small guided bombs, or in our case, small FPV drones. So that's all kind of nothing dramatically new, fortunately and unfortunately.
How has the drone been used in the war over the last couple of years? What's changed? How has it been used? And obviously, even last week, I mean, a rather sizable forward missions into Russia. Explain how it's been used during the war.
I'd say for the last 3 years, the roles hadn't changed dramatically. You still have the FPV drones. You still have ISR drones of different classes for different distances. What improved is the integration, the actual reliability of every single drone, and the scale. So I'd say out of all the technologies, one of the most surprising, as for me, because I wasn't the believer in the fiber optics technology at all, so kind of sorry for that. I'm a bad future describing guy. But when you have a unjammable, remotely thrown at grenade with a video camera you can control, that changes a lot. If you can throw it precisely for 25 kilometers. And over the last year, thanks are up to the increase of the distance of the drone operations, the gray zone significantly extended. So when it was 2022, when we started everything, it was 5 to 10 kilometers probably, and all was covered by artillery mostly and by mortars. Right now, they're at 25 kilometers from each side. So, and everything is eliminated by drones. It's way more efficient, and in terms of the mass adoption, way more adopted weapon than artillery that it was in 2022.
How do you expect the FPV drone to evolve in the coming years? Do you think that this will be the form factor that sticks, or will it be changed? Obviously, the mission will probably be here for a long time, but is the form factor going to change, do you think?
I've just told that sounds like I'm really bad talking about the future, but nevertheless, I do believe that there will be 2 directions of the development. The first one is the drones that will work together, that will be autonomous, launching from containers, so you can really launch a dozen of them, but that will be more on the kind of brigade level or regiment level, so covering like 20 to 25 kilometers of the front line, because it will be the very, very connected network of assets. And basically, we believe that we will contribute a lot to such a direction. But on the other hand, I still believe that the FPV drone, it already became and it will be there for the long time, just a part of the equipment of the infantry soldier, because end of the day, whatever you do, you capture the territory only when there is the human to put a step in the ground. It means we need infantry there. It means right now, look, the FPV drone training for the infantry soldier is like another piece of the training. So you have tactical medicine, you have like rifles, you have grenades, you have FPV drones, you have like tactics, trenches, everything. That's a little part of the educational process, of the training process. I do believe that they will be smaller, so you don't have to have like 25 kilometers range drone for the infantry guy. But if you will have 3 or 5 of them for 5 to 10 kilometers each, with a very, very simple control, it's just a precisely guided grenade. It will help you a lot. The next level will be covered by the different organizational level, as we just described.
Do you see that there are certain features or con-ops or things about drone technology that the end users, operators on the front lines are consistently asking for, that the engineers or product developments and drone companies often overlook or misunderstand or don't deliver?
I think the key point, look, one of the technologies that failed over the last year was actually the terminal guidance. Kind of the way how the drone can hit the target automatically. Less because of the lack of the technology, but way more because many teams started to do this as engineers. They paid zero attention to the actual customer need and actual customer experience. And at the end of the day, in half a year, after many teams and many deployments, Army figured out that it's way better to invest $200 to the better connectivity system, to the better communication model, than to terminal guidance. Because it's less risky, it's way more easy and way more clear, and you can just work with every single drone you used to work for the last 2 years. Answering your question, I think the most really demanded technology is just throw it away and it will hit someone. Because usually when you need drone for defense operation. I mean, when you execute the offensive operation, you can plan it accordingly. You have all the assets. You can plan and execute artillery support, intelligence support, etc., etc. But when you play defense, that's different story. And you have to have something that reacts really fast and as kind of self-confident, as autonomous as it could be. So throwing out the drone and saying there is someone 5 kilometers in front of me, just find them and strike them. This is kind of the silver bullet. Nobody delivered it yet. Of reasons, first of all, the immaturity of the technology, kind of because the whole computer vision in our world, I work for this industry for 15 years, the whole computer vision was trained on cats from the internet and from kind of trying to split the cookies from the puppies, but there is nothing that works on the battlefield. So there were high promises, unfortunately very, very little deliveries.
Can you explain more the distinction between investing in connectivity versus terminal guidance?
Every single normal armed forces unit right now has its own like small R&D lab. That's not called R&D lab, but that's a drone department, and they have tons of spare parts, tons of frames of different. They know how to work with radio links, like what is the difference between the ROS of different versions of VTX of whatever, like all the stuff, because they basically assemble it in their location, in their headquarters, and send it to the front line. Because 90% of the drone you got delivered as armed forces unit from the central warehouse, they just don't work due to different reasons. Because they're outdated, you need different frequencies, you need different like etc., etc., etc. So they rework everything. And when you try to add a little bit more expensive but like way more EW resistant communication model, that's the same. You just put another model, but everything other, it's still the same. Tactics, preparation, antennas, frequencies. This is why fiber optics drones worked pretty well. You change virtually nothing. You just have to fly a little bit slower, a little bit more carefully, and it's unjammable. Bam. Everything else is completely the same. No changes, no retraining, no answering dummy questions from your unit. Just do it again. With terminal guidance, you have to do a lot of things differently. You have to get adopted to its limitation. You have to get adopted to its like special way how to take the appropriate angle of attack for the target, because it's just a claim that you could do a pixel lock and it works. It's not there yet, and you have to retrain your people. And the added value is very, very kind of neglectable, because it's way easier for you having everything prepared just to put more power to the antenna, to find a better place for the radio relay drone or radio relay station, and you can strike it precisely. That's just because balance of the ROI versus efforts and versus unknowns.
I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but for what you are working on with swarming, how does that trade-off then look differently?
There is one interesting or surprising point and surprising customer, end user concern. They say, what it means drones will fly by themselves. You don't need us operators anymore, so they will took us and put us to trenches. No, we don't want your system. So that's kind of bringing a steam machine to the London like 300 years ago. On the other point, we kind of try to jump this gap, because we're not adding here, and this is impossible to add incremental improvement, like a small one, because you will always face, we don't need you, we just got a fiber optics based drone, for instance. We're presenting the multiplier here. So now you're an operator, you can control many drones at the same time. You still have sense of control, you still can do everything, you still use virtually the same communication systems you get used to, but now you just send not one drone and putting everything under your fingers, but you have 10 drones at the destination area. If you want, you can jump in and override the control and do the strike by yourself. If you're sure it works, you can just rely on the automated system. We work pretty carefully, like with step by step, and pretty close to customers, trying to find the fear and manage it. So, and sense of control is one of the biggest fears here.
What have been some of the more important tactical lessons about drone employment in Ukraine that other countries have not yet internalized?
That's interesting. Okay, let me try to tell it this way. The very, very key difference between having a FPV drone is that 90% of the previous approaches to the warfare is now irrelevant, because imagine you like 25 years ago, and so you have tanks, artilleries, EW systems, SIGINT systems, everything, but to hit something, you have to get the visual on the target, and then you can strike it with the precision guided munition, I don't know, from 25 kilometers away, or some bomb or some rocket, but you have to have visuals end of the day, or GPS connection. Right now, every single soldier for the range of 25 or more kilometers can have the combined ISR and immediate strike capability. So that makes, and you cannot cover it like with fences, with like hangars, with anything, because two soldiers, the first strike the hangar, the second strikes everything inside. And that makes the whole game different to the very, very core level. Like, and how do you protect your assets? How do you detect the threats? How do you counter them? It's not enough just to put like a high fence, put everything to the concrete hangars and everything will be intact. No way.
Yeah, that's really quite fascinating. It's amazing. And it is your sense that other countries haven't yet come to grips with that capabilities?
I think even Ukraine didn't get it to the 100% yet, because for us it's just a matter of survival. We just adopt and ingest it as it goes. But the interesting, it's not because I'm so smart here, just because I was trying to figure out why the latest strike to Russia military Air Force base was so kind of loud, because everybody was quiet for 2 days. And this is one of the core reasons why, because it's finally became very, very clear.
So when you have a 20 to 25 kilometer precision viewpoint that drones are providing, what's more likely being acted upon as a result? Are they bringing the munitions down via drone? Are they calling in artillery? Are they calling in, it's probably not air support. What's the more likely way that infantryman is engaging the enemy with that drone 25 kilometer precision viewpoint? How are they acting on the target? And I'm sure it depends on the target as well.
This depends on the target, but again, the key point that you now have combined capability. So as soon as you see the target, you strike it immediately, because you have the camera and the explosive by itself. Because before that, you had two different assets. You had eyes in the sky, but it was kind of some intelligence big drone without strike capabilities. You have something on the ground, like is it grenade launcher, is it mortar, is it like artillery? They don't have eyes. You have to coordinate them together. Now you have combined capability. That's very, very different.
You talk about combined arms. Yeah, that's impressive.
What are the maturation trends going on in the FPV drones themselves in the last 18 months? Because if we're going to be networking these drones together and allowing them to coordinate, there has to be some homogeneity on the software that's running on those drones, on the compute capacity that's on board them. You know, if the drone industry began with this really dispersed, you know, rapid high volume manufacturing, and you ended up with a lot of different types of drones in the air as a result, what are the trends now towards enabling them to mature and to work together? What are the things that people are emphasizing, and how is that contributing?
Basically, this is the problem we are solving in our company, connecting them together. Because as soon as you have, like, I read on the report 2 weeks ago, I have to check the source, but for the last year, there were 2,500 drone manufacturers emerged for the last year, like 2,500. It means just because it's really, really easy right now, you have to have virtually nothing to start a drone manufacturer. And this is basically the reason why my advice to anyone who thinks starting a drone factory in 2025, don't do this. It's useless. And because you have open source software for the basic stuff, you have a lot of commercially available spare parts and supply chain. You just put it all together and it flies. You put another one, it flies again. So, oh, look, mom, I'm a drone vendor right now. Can get my first government contract. But we still kind of, I believe, a year away from adding real smart features to the drone. And kind of we pushing hard in the direction. It should be different hardware, it should be different sets of the companion computers, different sort of connectivity lines. And unfortunately, Ukraine is not a good driver of innovations here by itself, because we still need like hundreds of thousands of simple FPV drones we got used to. We are a little bit stuck on this point of history of the development. As was shown by Mr. Ford, it's always not easy to bring the car instead of the horse, because people always want just a better horse. But when there is a huge sense of urgency that pushing you every single day, it's even harder. Because, okay, that's a fancy new stuff, amazing. Can we get another 300 of the previous brand new stuff, because we got used to it?
That's such an interesting point, because on the one hand, the benefit of being in Ukraine obviously is the proximity to the end user and the ability to learn and iterate really, really quickly. But to your point, you're highlighting a propensity to prioritize short-term benefit for obviously the existential nature of the war and the solutions that are needed today. And so it's almost that you need that Ukrainian footprint, but with a Western innovation mindset and a Western mindset to scaling the companies and building companies long term. Do you think that this is perhaps a, quote, a winning combination?
Absolutely.
To bring innovation? Yeah.
Absolutely. And one of the key things, look, like I spend probably more than half of my time right now in Kiev and a lot of time on the business trip. So when I come back to Kiev, like you immediately like spend 2 days talking to all the same people, just writing down now in person. My planning horizon as a CEO falls down to like 2 weeks. And it's virtually unmanageable. So I have to get out to sit to Warsaw or to visit you guys or like go to Prague. And now I'm able to think like in years and think about the long-term things. Just because the sense of urgency and just because that's a very, very good definition, the existential nature of the threat we cope with. That doesn't mean we don't have good partners in Ukraine. We have several armed forces units and the brigades that are really good in innovating and pulling that to the real battlefield. But I really wish we'd have much more of them.
You mentioned that we're about 1 or 2 years before we see some smart features being introduced into the drone space. What are those features?
I'd say at scale. So because we have the very first deployments, we see the first deployments of the autonomous targeting, of the autonomous ISR, of the some complicated things that trying to describe what's going on there. But we still keeping in mind the nature of the business, or keep in mind the nature of the end user and the risks and the stakes. We have to be really, really careful here. And every single time when you failed with the very first adoption, it means that there is a word on the street that this technology doesn't work and that's army, everybody know everyone, so kind of the word on the street works pretty well here. On the other hand, what we should have here is some different sorts of common operations, even let's put swarming aside, of group operations, so fly in the same direction, fly some formations. I do believe that we will have a lot of improvements in UGVs, because for ground vehicles, the navigation is still unsolved, and this is the key blocker for any kind of automated application or massive application, because in contrary to flying drones, ground vehicles, unmanned ground vehicles cannot navigate terrain by themselves. So they stuck in bushes, they like explode themselves on the mines, they found unmapped rivers and dive there, so all the fancy stuff. So that's why we cannot automate this efficiently, and as an army we have hundreds of pilots who work with them.
You mentioned earlier Operation Spiderweb. I'm curious, what are your takeaways from that?
I'd say my key takeaway here and my key outcome is the 99%, okay, 95%, but nevertheless, the absolute majority of the complexity of the operation was not the drone by itself. That's logistics, preparation, that's security service, and that was a brilliant operation. And making that happen in Russia especially, which is like by design the very, very vertically integrated and autocratic state, is just, that's fantastic. But the technology by itself is not something very, very unusual. We can see here in the city points, but the way how it worked, and I think the Secret Service is a very professional and lucky at the same time.
So it wasn't necessarily a spectacularly innovative drone capability that enabled the operation. The innovation was in other areas.
Yeah.
How they got them in, how they deployed them.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Because kind of LTE-based drones, like even our technology, we implemented that like a year ago. The terminal guidance that was supposedly used, I don't want to touch the point, the terminal guidance or whatever else, because that's a very speculative topic. Again, it's been used for a year on the battlefield for different kinds of drones. But that's not about the piece of technology. That's the state of the art of the operation in terms of the Secret Service operation. And I'd say we've seen that many times in the movies, correct? Kind of there is some drone attack with some like trucks with the swarms of drones, etc., etc. The point that, first of all, it happened. And the funniest part of the story was the operator who was filming basically the truck when the drones were flying out one by one. And he's just standing there, filming the footage. And my first thing was, guys, don't you realize that there were like 55 kilos of explosive in truck in front of you? Run out there. Because nobody knows, like, if they still have 20 drones, it means 2 of them will never take off, and you can have some very unpleasant consequences for you. But I think that's a very good reminder, or not reminder, probably Europe likes the wake-up call, buzzword for the last year, but probably it's a wake-up call for civilians, because in contrary to arms, in contrary to rifles, in contrary to any kind of like pistols, whatever else you have, a drone assault is virtually untrackable. So your operator is 5 kilometers away, sitting just in some, I don't know, from using the computer. So it's really hard to track him. That's a different kind of threat.
I agree. It just highlights an elevated level of vulnerability of infrastructure that people have not really spent too much time thinking about, for better or worse, at least the broader population. Okay, what about some of the technologies that you've seen over the last couple of years that turn out to be tactical disappointments, despite all the excitement early on? You touched on terminal guidance. Perhaps we can put that in that column for now, but what other things would you include in that list?
Unfortunately, it could be different kinds of non-GNSS navigation, kind of many of them. They were like from stars, visual navigation, stars like Estrel, whatever else, how to call it, base navigation, to all kinds of visual navigation, to all kinds of non-GPS, whatever else receivers. Because finally many teams figure out why it took so many time and efforts to launch the GPS. It's for a reason. And it's there for a reason. And Baidu for the same story from Chinese. So it's far from being solved. We use it from several vendors, for instance, for our solution, but it's far from being solved completely. I'd say that different kinds of automated systems and counter-UAS systems failed. We've seen many of them, from shooting some nets to kind of kinetical weapons, laser weapons, electromagnetic kind like microwave fryers, whatever else. Many promises, zero deliveries as for a moment. So we just start to scratch the ground, and it's done mostly by primes, not by small teams. To have a complete automated counter-UAS system One of the reasons, and the core reasons is physics. The drones are really, really small with a small footprint in W footprints, and it takes you a lot of efforts and science to build the radar just to guide the counter-UAS system. Other than that, not so much, I'd say we still at MS use drones as remotely controlled grenades, so they are still remotely controlled grenades with the camera.
On counter-UAS, what are you most excited about in terms of effect, but also something that a startup is in a better position to develop as opposed to the prime?
That's a good point. Like as a CEO of the startup who does swarms, we thought a little bit about the counter-UAS systems, and counter-UAS for us is one of our behaviors as well. Obviously, like swarm to counter swarms, but taking about the ideas, because I've seen so many of them, I'd say that any kind of fancy next generation things, non-kinetical things, kind of lasers, kind of microwave, kind of whatever, like sound waves, it isn't something worthwhile just from the physics background. So we still lack a small portable precision guidance system even for the rifle. So as soon as you can get a radar, sound radar, whatever, like grid or connected network of detectors that you can shut drone for 20 meters away, it will make a lot of difference.
As you roll out this automated capability that Swarmer is working on, what are the implications of that as it gets employed at scale, and what new challenges does it present? I mean, and it goes all the way down to some of the core assumptions of how the combat environment is unfolding today. I mean, today we're dealing with relatively static front lines. We're dealing with a 20 to 25 kilometer gap between them that is covered by these drone systems. Yet at the same time, we've just witnessed an attack that occurred, deep in Russian territory, far, far behind those lines. And so if we intersect some of the different technological trends and how they're being employed operationally, as you roll out this level of coordination through automated software and connectivity, I mean, I could just imagine there are a really large set of potential implications. And you're in the middle of this. You might have some really interesting insight as to what that's going to look like.
Could I ask maybe another question that precedes it, a little more elemental maybe, but important? What drove the need for what you're doing? What's the problem in the market right now in the battlefield that is compelling you to do what you're doing at Swarmer?
Oh, that's easy. Like page 1 of my pitch deck right now, but thanks, Jim. The point is, there is a single human pilot, at least one single human pilot behind every single drone. For bigger drones, it's like 3 to 5 of them, literally. And it means when you try to deploy 1 million of drones, you need 1 million of pilots. And if you're a manufacturer want to sell 1 million of drones, Army cannot purchase it because they don't have 1 million of pilots. And we solved this problem. We changed the way how it works. You are not an FPV pilot anymore. You're an operator, and you work with as many drones as you have. So, asymmetrical advantage, like another buzzword, for us here is not send 200 drones. It's just send as many drones as you have, like everything from the stockpiles. But they will bring some value. Every single drone will bring some value, and you don't have to have thousands of pilots. And this is a problem. And this is a problem we're solving. There are some pleasant consequences. You don't have to have operators close to the front line, and basically this is our motto: send drones, keep humans. End of the day, that's all about robots versus robots, and when the robots stockpiles will be depleted, there will be an infantry foot on the ground.
Okay, so if you are relieving a human operator bottleneck, which allows you to put a lot more drones into the air and to sustain that tempo for a longer period of time, because you are not bottlenecked by human operators on sticks with goggles, then you could mount an operation at some point in the combat theater on those lines that hasn't been seen before in terms of its level of intensity and its duration, which could be some of the implications that we're talking about here.
Yep, and I think the second one here is the latency, because one of the key differences between, imagine you have 10 drones managed by 10 people, and swarm by 10 drones managed by itself. Okay, and the time for coordination and collaboration between human piloted drones is really, really awful. In contrary to human pilots of the aircrafts, you don't see each other. You can't fly information. You have to look to the map to understand who does what. You have to talk to other people. You don't have visual contact. And the human communication is really poor here, is a real bottleneck. We figure out from the data we have, figure out many cases when pilots try to fly in swarm, work in swarm. Exciting insights on the one hand, on the other hand, never more than 3 guys, because it's really, really tough to coordinate. And let me try to tell you the story how it started in May 2023. With computers, and this is exactly what I'm talking, we design system for computers, not for humans. There is virtually zero delay. How do we discover the very first real combat applications? We were sitting in the restaurant room with the pilots, with the professional pilots, and I was asking them, guys, look, there were 3 or 4 professional pilots and 2 guys from the ground teams who are in charge of the ground deployment of the drones and the preparation. I say, okay, imagine you execute some mission together. We spent 15 minutes just speaking about, oh no, we don't work together, we're professional pilots, we're like aces, etc., etc. Okay, you work together as a group, and you have some complicated, let's pull some example from your real application, from your real combat task. For instance, destroying some buildings with enemies. Okay, and there are 4 of you. You have 4 different drones of 4 different sizes and different kind of payloads. Just let's try to make it a little bit. Bring some fun here, and imagine you can take a break every single second. As soon as you need to talk to each other, you just press pause and stand up and go take some cigarette, bring some coffee. You have 2 hours. It's like you play in the game. We spend another 30 minutes just jumping to this direction, and then we figure it out. We started to figure out that there are many things they have never time to discuss. They have never time to negotiate. Okay, if there is such a complicated point here, I can ask you, because now I know that you're nearby, I can ask you to bring some high penetrative explosive there, and then I will bring another one. So, but it will take them 10 minutes just to align on that point. And this is the reason why they never do this in real life. But for computer, it's 15 milliseconds. And as soon as the scale grows, for computer, it's still the same 15 milliseconds. For humans, it's no, thank you. And this is the interesting story, because this kind of latency or handicap or text for communication grows tremendously with the size of the group. And it's even not about, I think it's about both things, about the fear and about the difference of what drones brings to the modern civilian security. There is someone who has combined video camera and explosive, combined capability, and here is the same. Swarming brings you the instant collaboration at any scale, and hopefully it will put us to the position when it will be a significant threat by itself that it will prevent us from entering the actual warfare, because you can do things at scale with 10 or 100x more efficient and more fast way than without good computer-based collaboration.
Before we start talking more about swarming, I think it might be good to define some definitions and make sure that we're on the same page, because there are many people who have their own definition of what swarming is. You mentioned early on that some confuse operating multiple drones from a single controller as a type of swarming, which in fact it is not. And so in your textbook, what is swarming? What is not swarming?
Okay, so we have our definition as well. So swarming is not automation. Swarming is not switching the one operator between many drones. Or swarming is true collaboration and self-collaboration and self-communication by drones. So they work together to achieve the goals that humans set. Or another drone set probably in some future, but this is the point. So you don't task and you don't control a single asset. You operate the goals for the whole group. And the timelines, the sequences, whatever. I imagine it's I really wish, and it was started not from just the defense of the company. We want to work on the collaboration of the normal robots in civilian world. So it's I want to get my own, fix it here. I want to start irrigation then, or just do everything you need to fix my backyard, and they manage by itself. So this is the way how do you operate with a set of smart people that are able to coordinate together. And this is what swarming is for us, how we define it. Not about you do this, you do this, you do this, you do this, you have 5 minutes. That's not swarming, that's just micromanagement.
Right. Are you comfortable talking about certain ConOps that you are working towards or trying to enable?
I think we can touch a little bit the very simple ones. So combined arms operation, the very simple combined arms operation called seek and hit approach, when you have a set of the drones, part of them are ISR drones, I mean intelligence one, the rest are the strike ones. And you set the area, exactly. This is exactly the definition of how do you operate with the swarming. You set the area, you apply the template of seek and hit operation, and set the group of the drones. Like you have 10, 15 drones, they take off, fly there, like managing all the stuff around trajectories, around, like, you don't think about this. You just put, guys, don't fly there. Why? Because there are friendly anti-air system that they just don't give a shit about friendly or not friendly forces. They hit everything that flies. Or don't go there because there are enemies. But other than that, it's up to you. And as soon as you, as a human pilot, has a video stream from one of the few drones, you just work with the video stream and engage the targets, do actually the pixel lock. And then you don't care about which drone will hit the target. You just can say, okay, this is the vehicle and this is the infantry. And if drone knows that it has anti-infantry payload, it will take a target, and vice versa. You don't think about, like, you just operating with the system as a, you have 5 shots, for instance, and you have like 3 shots left, so you can engage 3 more targets. This is one very basic concept. Still has a lot of human in the loop to give a sense of control and to keep the safety as a P0, because for the 10 to 15 kilometers there is a higher chance that friend of foe system, like, I mean, not informational system, but the human and management system to detect friend of foe can fail. And the second concept, again from the simple ones, is the kill box, so or kill zone is a NATO standard. So you define the area 35 kilometers away, 500 to 500 meters. Kind of the point here is I, as an officer, human officer, is in charge, and this is my responsibility to say that there is only like no friendly forces, no civilians. Like I take this responsibility. You go there, find all the vehicles in that area. You know that they are not destroyed before, and hit it, and that's it. 5 drones, 10 payloads, go away. Completely autonomous, like sending the squad of special forces.
I loved Luca's question. How do you define swarming? Because it is not what I would have thought. That's interesting. It's automated coordination is what you're defining it as opposed to overwhelming automated coordination. But is there any automated coordination happening today as you define swarming?
Probably somewhere in Secret Service or intelligence agency there is something, but
not in Ukraine. Not in the war.
Fortunately for us, kind of for us as Ukrainians, I didn't see anything. And again, for the last 2 years, my favorite joke at the pitch deck is like, I can write a book of such a size. Why nobody did swarming before? It's so easy. No, it's not easy. There is a huge set of technologies that are very immature, and we still struggle with them. But no, we had a demo with one of our partners in North America. I'm just trying to omit all the sensitive names here, a month ago, and they were really, really excited because they say, finally, this is officially the very first real swarm that flies like midair in North America. Everything we've seen before is just automation.
Interesting. What's the level of difficulty of automated coordination of 2 versus 100 drones on the battlefield?
It depends on how do you approach it, and this is where we are pretty unique. So we keep this mental model from the zero, kind of. So that's why our goal is to manage like hundreds of drones. We have a mathematical limitation right now, 690. But as soon as we face it, we can fix it somehow. Let's face it first. But it depends on the approach. With our solution, it's more on the communication, networking side, etc., less than mathematical one. And this is one of the main complexities here. But as you talk, look. If you don't touch swarming, if you work just with automation, this is where like Chinese drone drones shine, or Intel drone drones shine. We have 6,000 of drones. There is a special software that exists for like a decade, and it works pretty well. You put a separate mission, basically this is the route for every single pixel, and it's done. Works pretty well.
What is most difficult to develop, mature, execute on to reach swarming as a capability?
You know, I don't think that's the key. The real art of the story here, and I'm proud of my team and of my approach, is to build that all and to make it work together based on the set of very immature technologies. You work with non-GPS navigation. Usually when you take something that like proven to be working on the combat or in like some kind of NATO country, usually I don't know if I can pronounce it in Europe, but it sucks. It fails to deliver. When you put it to the testing field, it works like 5 out of 10. And then when you manage to make it working, you still figure out that there are a lot of unpleasant side effects. The same with terminal guidance, the same with any kind of target recognition, any kind of object detection, whatever. So a set again of very, very, very poorly prepared technologies, because they are there just for a year or two. There was nothing 3 years ago. And to put this all together and to find the way how the whole technological chain is being built in the way when every single next step compensates some issues with the previous step, like we do with, for instance, with fire rate. When the team developed targeting stage, they knew that the navigation system will probably miss the point for 300 meters, and they have to implement a set of special strategies to cope with it. And then it started to work together. And there are many, many little things like that and that's complete autonomous system. Like another dimension, we touched it at the beginning, so drones are still being built to be piloted. It means if something goes wrong, so there is a human pilot who can jump in, override the control, and fix the situation. When you have 25 drones with 2 kilos of payload above your head, no way. You cannot jump in and unfix all the 25 drones. It requires different approach to R&D, requires different approach to testing, to the huge set of fallback strategies, kind of what if things go wrong? What if I see and face this kind of malfunction? And this gives a lot of more complexity.
What is the most common pushback that you are getting from the engineering-minded folks? Is it about how do you achieve swarming in a GNSS-denied environment? Is it about how do you achieve inter-swarm communications and collaboration in EW type of environments? What's the most common pushback, and which one is the most valid and the one that you're kind of emphasizing?
The most common pushback is nothing works. When I trying to bring some new, for instance, we build integration for some scenario, and we looking for, again, we are very focused on what we do. We don't try to reinvent everything. It means we use a lot of third-party vendors to be fast. But the key pushback is, oh, fancy new piece of technology. I bet it doesn't work. This is our experience for the last 2 years. But the most valid one is probably the navigation, because we work with many teams, and we checked more than 16 teams to select the vendors we work with right now. And as we're not building Enduril here, and we don't have a budgets or a financial model for like $50K US dollars or euros per unit for the navigation, we should work with the different kinds of the technologies, again, to be able to roll out it at scale. And we work with 16 or 26 teams who promise to deliver us best visual-based navigation in the world, and it's some kind of street legend in our company. Oh, another one. Okay.
What's the greatest value to the battlefield commander? Let's say they now have a swarmer capability. What's the greatest advantage on the battlefield? Is it that I can bring more operations with, obviously one is I only need one pilot. I don't need a lot of pilots. If you were going to talk to the battlefield commander, he or she now has your capabilities. Describe to them what they're now able to do and at what cost that they weren't otherwise able to do in the past.
The key point, like the very, very instant feedback, is as soon as I could put the pilot out of the front line, I'm done. So it's even for swarming, that's not the key benefit, but one of the outcomes, because you don't have to be a professional pilot anymore, and we build the whole system in this way. And the second point is the reaction time. So the ability to have several drones in the same place, like completely automated, so you don't think about how do you get them there, how many pilots do you need just to bring it to that location, and then have a very short latency time to kill, or the kill chain latency. It brings interesting. That's one of the most important things for the army commanders, but this is the thing we fail to quantify in any kind of dollars, because it saves lives. A lot of lives. And when I just say, guys, you can use 5 drones, like every single next drone you will be able to use within every single next 10 seconds in the destination area, because we will bring them all together. They just shut up and take my money. We quantified the efficiency of the drone per strike in terms of the target versus drone price ratio, but for this kind we still struggle to measure it in terms of in value, in dollars, because it's quite hard.
And to drive that point home, help us understand, how long does it take to train a drone pilot? And what does that sort of progression look like for them, so that we understand how much of a change we're talking about?
I mean, when we introduce our system, That's interesting because if it's
I mean, even as the baseline, without your system, how long does it take to train a pilot to be really effective?
so again, taking away any kind of our solution, like let's talk about drones. So if you have a talented one, it takes you around 2 to 4 weeks to be a professional FPV pilot. That's a piloting part. Then you have to take, depending on the class and on the manufacturer of the drone, is it kind of a small FPV? So that's virtually zero. And it could be up to 2 to 4 weeks for the big ASR drones. You have to pass training for the kind of pre-flight check preparation. How do you work with with boxing and unboxing? How do you work with many little sensitive things like antennas, etc., etc.? Because most drones are still made of like many hanging pieces of plastic, antennas, and wires. You have to be, as a pilot, you have to be able to repair and to do the field tests, field fixes for most of the equipment. If it's fixable in field, it's way better to do it right now than to try to pack it, because even the exposure time and the ground that is in field matters a lot. Every single minute increases the chances that you will be hit by the Iskander or some other rocket or FPV drone. So the numbers are like this: I'd say from 2 to 4 weeks for the training to be powered by itself, depending on the class of the drone and on the candidate, and the same amount of time for the kind of more engineering training. How do you work with this specific model of the drone?
But isn't there a lot of practice that has to go into flying these drones that takes more than a couple of weeks to become proficient at?
Yeah, fortunately, you can do it in simulator, so you don't need the actual drone. That's way easier.
Okay.
What's your greatest vulnerability? What's your greatest fear of a counter drone capability when you're developing coordinated automation like you are right now? And how is that vulnerability different than today's drone operations?
That's a good point, because the difference between counter UAV for the swarm and the counter UAV for the one drone is basically the rollout time of the system and the capacity of the counter UAV system. So that's more about the physical features of the drone, the materials, kind of the dimensions, etc., and the velocity than for the swarm by itself. Because of course there are like basic behaviors like strike the same system from different sides at the same time if you know the limitations of the rotation platform. But that's it's a shame to call it swarming. It's just automation. So that's a part of the embedded script. That's a good point, because we just literally scratched the ground in terms of the real counter UAV systems. We just got the very first deployment of anti-Shahed drones, and they're far from being perfect and a little bit expensive. So we have virtually zero deployed, like just a very several sets of the experimental deployments of the ground counter UAV systems against FPV drones. We're not there yet. So, but we'll see. That was interesting. We started a year ago to talk with armed forces units, saying, guys, we're trying to put some smart trajectories and some smart behaviors to harden the counter UAV approach for the current deployments. Can you please share us some good practices? How do you train your people to counter incoming UAV assault? Okay, we will do this. So just fire everything you see right now. Fire everything you have from all the rifles, all the arms, and God bless you. Yeah. Okay, that's it's tough to counter, but we will try.
High-powered microwaves are often described as a good counter-UAS system against swarms, but at the same time, there are ways that one can shield electronics and other sensitive components. Do you see that as an effective weapon system against drones and swarms in particular?
I think that's probably the only effective system in terms of all the technologies we have. So laser, but it's even easier for you to counter the laser emission just by paints, by the smart configuration of the surfaces. But I think if you have the phased array antenna as a emitter one and have a proper amount of power, you can be fast enough to counter the swarm. The point always there is that's a never-ending story. But I think in terms of the efficiency, it will be one of the best solutions. Or a swarm of drones to counter the swarm of drones, just as easy.
How do you expect the acceptance or adoption of the concept of swarming among militaries in the West to evolve in the coming years? Because one can argue that militaries, yes, they are looking at the role of drones in Ukraine, but at the same time, they are just struggling to figure out how do we institutionalize those drones? How do we change the doctrines? What is the impact on training? What is the impact on organizational structures? They're yet on that first stage of embracing drones as a weapon system, let alone think about some more advanced ConOps like swarming. What are your thoughts on that? And what do you see as catalysts to accelerate that sense of urgency?
So the first question was about what do I see in terms of adoption right now, or the perception, correct? That's an interesting story. On the one hand, swarm is a really buzzword of 2024 and a little bit of 2025. So I'm proud to name the company in the proper way. On the other hand, sounds like we're one of the very few companies who really understand what should work and what is just fancy promises. In terms of the they or we, I don't know, we are still figuring out as kind of a set of West countries what's going on there. Because for Ukrainians, this is the one end of the scale. Kind of, we just need something right now, like in tens of thousands of units, and just tell us how to use it, we will use it. In West, that's different perception. We have the air superiority, we have artilleries, we have everything. Good luck trying to hit us with the swarm of drones. We will just hit your factories and depots earlier. I think it will be way better because as we work right now with several MODs to get deployed, to get the first kind of ConOps, really approved ConOps concept, etc., I think it's just too early right now to talk about any kind of specific matters. Because everybody, like French MOD, UK, United States, Japanese, Polish, Lithuania, everybody tries to figure out what the heck is going on, what the heck should we do with the drones. And one of the interesting stories is the warfare nature is very different. Ukraine is a very special kind of place because this is not something we see in Israel. This is not something we expect to see. I hope that never happened in Poland or in Estonia or in Middle East, whatever. There's different landscapes, different everything. So there is no good doctrine right now. There is no good set of strategies or applications, unfortunately.
When you say that those militaries are looking at what's happening in Ukraine and trying to parse things out, what is it that they are having trouble with internalizing or observing? Do they question the relevance and applicability of this outside of Ukraine? Or are they questioning this disruption from such a low level of technology and weapon system? What is it that they're mostly, quote, confused about?
I think this is a good point, and I believe that this is one of the reasons why we still have a lot of promises and a lot of excitement around NATO Innovation Fund. I'm sorry for that. Around all the budgets for grants for everything. We had a hard discussion in Latitude 59 2 weeks ago about that. It's way better to give money to armed forces unit and they will just get some experimental purchase. Let me try to explain. They try to put some money to the hands of the small startups, because what's happening in Ukraine, you can validate everything kind of right now, and when you start to deliver something to the front line, you as a small startups from 2 students, you get connected to the actual military guys and you figure out the whole wonderful world of the consequences and all the surprises around you, because they're a joint arms operation. You have to get intelligence, you have to get confirmation, you have to get check everything that's you've never seen before. You cannot touch it in civilian life at all. That's different set of practices, compliances, etc., etc., etc. And given that, on the one hand, here in Europe, kind of we try, on the United States, we try to build some innovative sandboxes. On the other hand, they're still miles away from the actual armies and from the actual problems they're trying to solve. On the other hand, the army by itself, I have such a feeling that they look at Ukrainian kind of tens of thousands of drones. They are very, very low tech technology. And for instance, Germany army, imagine I try to purchase 10,000 of drones for FPV drones. What I will do with them within next year, because the batteries will die. I will not pass any compliance for any kind of hazardous materials, because that's different story. Zero training involved, no long-term support. That's just kind of this different set of standards in terms of the technology. So it's kind of a dead end. On the one hand, you cannot adopt, and you don't plan to adopt what you see right now on the battlefield. On the other hand, when you try to innovate, but there is no clear understanding, okay, innovate what or what for?
Let's talk about the startup system in Ukraine and where we see it evolving and the future role that we see it playing globally. right? There's a lot of talk about the innovation coming out of Ukraine. And yes, right now there are a lot of elements that make it necessarily short-term focused, but it's going to have a big impact. What do you see the shape of that being over the coming years?
I think we're following obviously the pretty normal track of developing any kind of the pricing technology. Like the same was with biotech, the same was with AI, the same was before with like .com even. So we will see consolidation, and in contrary to many other technological directions in computing or networking, you have to have a real hardware here. So it means consolidation is something that is inevitable, because other than that, there is not so many end users and not so many budget owners, and you should be delivered there mostly like as a startup, mostly as a piece of the hardware or as a part of someone's piece of the hardware. This is kind of, again, if you want to try to build a new company in 2025 for defense, target some component market, do something that's useful for many vendors, because out of 2,500 drone manufacturers, I don't think it's a good idea to be another one. So, and there are always first signs of movements. Kind of big companies try to pull local teams and small teams, like to purchase them, to just invite them, to onboard them, to hire, to acquire, whatever else. We all here face the same story like it was in America in early technological revolution era, when the bigger companies right now, they build a good and successful hardware manufacturing business. They try to pull some small teams and startups to speed up the innovation, but that's still the same big manufacturer with a very, very with a very, very proper culture. It's not about innovation. It's not about just doing things again and again, period. But I'm really curious how to take your look, guys, because you're observing this from the VC standpoint, and you see how it changed over the last 2 years.
I would agree with the short-termism that really is evident when talking to a lot of teams. The sense of incrementalism is real. Also, a lot of technical competence in the teams, and yet blind spots in terms of the ability to run a business, to grow a business, to scale a business, to attract interest of investors. And also the projects that entrepreneurs are trying to build companies out of, when in fact it is it's a piece of innovation that will be a part of a stack. And so those are some of the things that I would highlight.
What changed in the last 2 years as you started to work with, as far as I remember, or year and a half, as you started to touch the Ukrainian market? Like any changes for negative direction or for positive one?
I think people started to ask for more money.
Is it a positive one or a negative one?
It depends. It depends. I think, people have gotten better in describing the value proposition. I think they have learned the VC ecosystem, and that aspect of the dynamics is a lot more understood than earlier. And I think thanks to some of the programs that exist in Ukraine, accelerators or otherwise, that are coaching entrepreneurs, I think there has been a maturity on that front.
Okay, that's great. So kind of rephrasing it, people, we here at this side of the story, startuppers, start to figure out better that in Ukraine that VCs have your own metrics, you have your own goals, and kind of that's not a kind of grant of free money. That's a way of doing business in a proper way.
Mm-hmm.
Cool.
Yeah, that's right. And I think even more understanding of the VC model is necessary for founders to be able to then understand the investor's perspective and the criteria that folks are like us are evaluating and assessing. Not everything is a venture backable business. Certainly most companies that we have talked in Ukraine are not. Despite the interesting work that they're doing, there are other sources of capital that are probably better suited for those projects.
Perfect. So we're learning slowly but surely. Oh, that was a great set.
It's like trying to find long-term differentiation amongst these companies, combined with applicability to markets outside and beyond Ukraine. Western markets, 3 years, 5 years from now, where do these technology roadmaps fit in to that future picture? I think that's been a very common question that we've come up against.
Yeah, makes perfect sense.
Yeah. Any parting thoughts, Serhii, for the audience?
Not really. I think we touched almost everything. almost everything. So I really hope that in a year we will have the same conversation in a very different set in the peacetime, and talking about how should we apply the outcomes of the highly developed defense sector in Ukraine to the civilian world now.
Likewise.
Yeah.
Yep.
Likewise. Yeah, fascinating conversation. Thank you very much for finding time. And,
Thank you very much for hosting me. It was a pleasure to talk to you guys.
All right, that's a wrap for today. Thank you for listening to the Vertical Space Podcast. Reach out if there are topics that you would like us to discuss, and goodbye until the next episode. Unless mentioned, this podcast is in no way endorsing or promoting any person and or company mentioned, and all opinions within the podcast are solely that of the presenters. The Vertical Space makes no guarantees, warranty, or representation of any information given in this podcast. Any information given is for informational purposes and should be used at your own risk. This podcast is for general, educational, and entertainment purposes only.